Before my wedding, my wicked narcissistic sister tried to seduce my fiancé, but she was caught on camera and my parents disowned her. This is about my older sister, Hazel, 30F, who has always seemed to resent my existence. She believes I'm living a life I don't deserve. She's currently divorced, unemployed, and staying with her parents. Hazel dropped out of college to be with her wealthy boyfriend, who later divorced her after discovering her true personality. Growing up, my relationship with Hazel was never good. She was always considered the beautiful and intelligent one, but she had a very self-centered attitude. Our parents constantly praised her and took her side, leaving me feeling inadequate. Everyone admired her looks, while I was overlooked, which really hurt. Hazel would use this dynamic to get under my skin, making comments about how no one liked me. Those jabs left me deeply insecure over the years. My parents never supported me in conflicts with Hazel. They ignored my feelings because she always met their expectations. This led me to emotionally distance myself from them as a child and teenager. When our parents were at work, Hazel often had her friends over, and they would mess with my room. On one occasion, they even ruined an important school project of mine, which almost caused me to fail. I wanted to tell Mom, but Hazel blackmailed me, threatening to share embarrassing pictures of me with my classmates. As a 15-year-old, I felt helpless. I was terrified back then. Hazel never took responsibility for her actions, and telling my parents felt pointless since they never seemed to care. She did so many things that made me resent her deeply. While Mom never supported me, Dad would occasionally call her out, but even that didn't stop her. One time, she used my phone to send embarrassing pictures of me to my friend's group chat just because I had complained to Dad about her behavior. Another time, she spilled coffee on my prom dress, then cried and played the victim, claiming it was an accident. After that, I stopped confiding in him. It felt useless. I couldn't understand why she harbored so much hatred toward me. Eventually, I realized her behavior had nothing to do with me. She was simply a narcissist. She had been toxic in every relationship, cheating on every boyfriend she ever had. It's hard to admit, but she was also a gold digger. Even her ex-husband, who remains friendly with me, confirms that. She was manipulative as a teenager, and adulthood only seemed to make her worse. Looking back, I blame my parents for enabling her behavior. They never disciplined her, and it only allowed her toxic traits to grow. Things started to improve for me after high school. I worked hard, got into my dream college, and after a few challenging years, landed my dream job. It was during this time that I met Jaxon, the love of my life, at an office conference. He was intelligent, kind, and incredibly handsome. We hit it off right away, and within a few months, we started dating. Our relationship grew stronger as we traveled together, going on vacations, date trips, and hikes. Those moments brought us closer and helped build a strong bond. Jaxon was very close with his sibling, so just a few months into our relationship, he introduced me to his brothers and parents. However, I took my time before introducing him to my family. The main reason for the delay was my sister, Hazel, and her malicious behavior. I always had this gut feeling that she would try to sabotage everything. Growing up, she always seemed to get the best of everything, and now that my life was improving while hers wasn't, I knew she wouldn't be able to handle it. Especially not my relationship with Jaxon. However, I couldn't put it off forever. Jaxon had started to notice my hesitation and was getting suspicious about why I hadn't introduced him to my family yet. After dating for 1.5 years, I finally told my dad about him. He was thrilled that I had found a man who truly deserved me, and he invited us to dinner. I was excited but also stressed because I knew Hazel could go to any lengths to ruin my happiness. Although Jaxon already knew about my family dynamics, I still took the time to explain everything to him in detail. He was calm about it and assured me that he'd handle things. A few days later, after I had called Dad, I received a surprising call from Hazel. She had never reached out to me before, and this time she was asking about Jaxon. She wanted to know when I'd be visiting home, and more importantly, she seemed extremely interested in getting details about him. I figured that Ma must have told Hazel about me dating Jaxon and how serious things had gotten. Now, she's suddenly trying to act all friendly with me, but I can see through her. I know her true intentions, and I'm starting to wonder if I should really risk introducing Jaxon to her. I'm aware that she won't have good intentions, and I'm considering alternative options, like having my parents come over to my place instead. To me. By the way, thanks so much for all the helpful advice in the comments. A few of you asked more about Hazel, so here's some context. It's true that my parents, especially my dad, changed their stance on Hazel after her divorce. She really ruined things for herself. While she was great academically growing up, as soon as she got into college, her entire focus shifted to her looks and body. She met Lucas, a super wealthy guy, and quickly became obsessed with him, abandoning her studies in the process. During my final year of school, I was preparing for my college entrance exams, and Hazel kept telling me I'd never make it into my dream college, but I proved her wrong when I got in. For the first time, I finally received validation from my parents, who were genuinely happy and proud of me. However, Hazel didn't handle it well at all. She was jealous when all the attention shifted to me, and she wasn't the center of it anymore. To celebrate my achievement, my parents threw a small party with close family and friends, but I could tell Hazel wasn't thrilled about it. At my celebration party, Hazel made sure to steal the spotlight by announcing her engagement to Lucas right in front of everyone. You could clearly tell from Lucas's face that he had no idea she was planning this. But, despite the awkwardness, she succeeded in making that day about her. The guests were all excited to hear about Lucas, especially since he was apparently wealthy, according to Hazel. Hazel always flaunted the expensive gifts Lucas gave her, constantly telling me that I'd never find a rich husband because I was ugly and nobody would want to date someone like me. She would make these cruel remarks that left me feeling worthless. In response, I told her I wasn't interested in being a gold digger like her and that I could pay my own bills. If she wanted a rich husband, I wouldn't stand in her way. Looking back, she was incredibly selfish and manipulative, the most self-centered person I've ever encountered. A week later, Hazel and Lucas got engaged, but I was already in college and didn't attend their engagement celebration. During my time at college, I didn't have any communication with her. Coming home for the holidays felt refreshing because Hazel was living with Lucas, and she would spend vacations with him in exotic destinations. After a year of dating, they got married in a lavish ceremony, with most of the expenses covered by Lucas, and my dad paid for the rest out of courtesy since Hazel didn't work. Their marriage didn't last long, though. After 3 years, they got divorced. I found out the real reason behind Hazel and Lucas's split. Hazel never wanted children, while Lucas was eager to start a family. He told me that he never pressured her, but he was frustrated that she avoided discussing her preference for years. He also shared how Hazel's drinking and partying habits, along with her flirting with men in bars, made him feel like she had married him solely for his money without any emotional connection. He showed me videos of Hazel out at bars, where men would touch her inappropriately and she would just let it happen. It made sense to me that Lucas finally left her. Despite all this, my parents sided with Hazel, blaming Lucas for forcing her to have children and never acknowledging her role in the marriage's failure. After the divorce, Hazel moved back in with my parents since she was unemployed, having dropped out of college to marry Lucas. Now, 5 years later, she still didn't have a degree or any work experience. She acted as though she was devastated by the divorce, but in reality, she seemed thrilled to be free. Within a month of the divorce, she was back to her usual lifestyle, clubbing and hooking up. Her life seemed to revolve around weekly dates, and she had no problem ditching people along the way. I could see all of this from her Instagram stories, which gave me a clear picture of what she was really up to. Meanwhile, after 2 years of hard work in my career, I landed my dream job with an impressive salary, and my parents were over the moon. When I visited home after receiving the job offer, Dad was so proud of me, and I could finally feel the validation I had always longed for. I couldn't have been happier. We were having dinner when Hazel came home, clearly part drunk. Dad was upset by her appearance and told her she should have focused on her education, like I did, instead of messing up her life for a man like Lucas. He pointed out how well I was doing with my career, while Hazel was still relying on them for money. Mom told Dad to stop making such harsh comments, but Hazel completely lost it, slamming the door in frustration. That was when Dad realized just how spoiled Hazel had become. He told Mom she needed to talk some sense into her. Hazel needed to take responsibility for her life and stop depending on them. Later that evening, Hazel came into my room and tried to tear me down. She told me that no matter how much money I made, I could never be like her. She started body shaming me, pointing out my belly and chubby cheeks. As a teenager, I used to be hurt by her cruel words, but now I was just fed up. I laughed and told her I didn't want to be like her, and it was clear she needed to change her attitude. That set her off completely. She demanded that I leave the house, but I reminded her that it was my parents' house and that she had no authority over me. The next day, while I was packing to leave, I discovered that 2 of my dresses had been badly torn. Someone had clearly cut them with scissors. I went downstairs to show my parents Hazel's childish behavior. Dad called for her in anger, but Mom tried to defend her, claiming Hazel was in shock and didn't know what she was doing. Dad firmly told Mom to stay out of it, then stormed at Hazel, telling her she needed to get her life together. He told her he could no longer support her or tolerate her narcissistic attitude. This did not sit well with Hazel, and she grew to resent me even more. Since then, I have become the target of her intense hatred. I wasn't bothered by her animosity until she made advances toward my boyfriend. After a lot of thought and discussion of the situation with Jaxon, I finally decided it was time to visit my parents with him. There was no point in hiding Jaxon from Hazel anymore because no matter what, she would eventually try to get to him. My friends suggested that it would be better to test the relationship now than risk losing him later. The only way Hazel could succeed in her malicious plan was if Jaxon gave in. With some hesitation, I brought Jaxon to my parents' house. I couldn't believe what happened next. Hazel threw herself at him. While he was greeting my mom and dad, Hazel practically forced a hug on him. I couldn't understand why she thought Jaxon would be attracted to her. She had dyed her blonde hair black, dressed in a new outfit, and had her nails and hair all done up as though Jaxon were there on a date with her. She kept inserting herself into the conversation, and it was clear that everyone was ignoring her at the dinner table. She rushed to sit next to Jaxon when I asked her to move so I could sit there. She gave me an annoyed look, but eventually moved. Throughout the evening, she asked Jaxon about his interests, and whenever he mentioned something he liked, she would claim she liked it too, even if she didn't. Then she'd go on about how compatible they were and wink at me, trying to make it seem like she was just joking. But what she was trying to do was obvious. Jaxon, clearly uncomfortable, ignored her and redirected the conversation to my parents. Her moves were so blatant. After dinner, I went to take a shower, leaving Jaxon alone. That's when Hazel walked in and asked Jaxon to dial her number because she couldn't find her phone. It was all a scheme to get his number. He told me later that while I was occupied with other things, Hazel tried to gain his sympathy by telling him a sob story about her divorce and how it took years for her to heal. The surprising part was that Mom joined in, complaining about Lucas too. After a while, Jaxon asked me if I wanted to go for a walk and give him a tour of the neighborhood. Before I could respond, my sister stood up and said she would join us. Jaxon gave her a confused look and said he preferred some alone time with me. Her face turned red with embarrassment. She retreated to her room after that, and now, just a few days after the visit, I'm expecting Hazel to pull more tricks to try and lure Jaxon. I'm definitely worried about it, but I also trust my man and want to see how he handles her advances. Update. Hello everyone, I'm engaged. Jaxon proposed to me last month during a trip. Yes, he got down on one knee with a ring, and I couldn't stop gushing over it. After our visit to my parents, Hazel did try to manipulate Jaxon. She texted him asking how he was doing. Since Jaxon loves cats, Hazel started bombarding his inbox with cute cat videos, even though she'd never cared about cats before. Once she found out Jaxon adored them, she got one herself and began recording videos to send him. For the first few weeks, Jaxon would show me Hazel's desperate messages, asking about his work and pretending to be caring. But after a while, he stopped telling me about her messages. I thought she had given up on him and moved on, and we both kind of stopped thinking about her. We were busy with our hectic work schedules. However, one day, while I was scrolling through social media, I noticed that Hazel had added Jaxon as a friend. She was liking and commenting on every one of his posts, sending those silly heart emojis. She'd even gone back and commented on his old photos and videos from the last 7 to 10 years. I started feeling uneasy about it, and out of nowhere, decided to check his phone. I noticed that Hazel was still texting Jaxon, but her messages were left unread, and they seemed pretty strange. She was clearly trying hard to get his attention. In the call logs, I saw some missed calls, including one at around 3 a.m. That really made me anxious, so I confronted him about why he hadn't told me about Hazel texting him. Jaxon got nervous and explained that he'd been ignoring her messages. And then finally, we texted the 2 friends who were missing to beg them to call back. I pressed him about the late-night calls, and he stayed calm. He sat me down and explained that one night, Hazel had called him when she was really upset. He said he got scared, thinking something was wrong, and she started talking about some traumatic experiences related to Lucas, saying she needed someone to talk to. Jaxon told her that it wasn't appropriate to call him so late and suggested she talk to her parents instead. He even told her she should have talked to me first. That really bothered me, and I told him that keeping this from me wasn't sitting well with me and that it was starting to affect my trust in him. He reassured me that he would never fall for her manipulation and that I had nothing to worry about. Still, I've read countless stories about husbands falling into these traps, even when they tried their hardest to avoid it, and I didn't want to be naive. I told him that the next time Hazel called him, he had to hand the phone over to me. I was determined to catch Hazel in the act of her manipulation. One night, her call came through and woke me up. I answered, and when she heard my voice, she was silent for a moment before claiming it was a mistake and quickly hanging up. The next day, I called her repeatedly to warn her, but she didn't respond. So I texted her from Jaxon's phone, making it clear that it was me, and telling her to stop calling or texting him during odd hours. I told her that if there was anything urgent, she should contact me, not him. After that, she was stopped messaging him, and I felt relieved that she was finally out of our lives. After Jaxon proposed, I sent a picture of the ring to my dad. Hazel must have shown it to my mom, and that's when her stalking behavior started again. She began texting Jaxon and sending him random videos. I was done with her at this point. When Jaxon told me about her messages, I called her and yelled at her to stop with her games and get a life. She was mostly silent as I vented all my frustration, but I didn't realize that she wasn't going to back off. As soon as I hung up, I received an angry call from my mom, yelling at me for insulting my sister. Hazel told Mom that I was accusing her of trying to steal my fiancé, and my mom claimed that my actions were causing Hazel panic attacks. She asked if I could be more considerate, as Hazel had been struggling with depression and was still recovering from her traumatic divorce. It was frustrating because Hazel had never shown any signs of being depressed about her divorce. I ended the call and told Dad that if they continued to ignore Hazel's behavior, I would cut them off. I couldn't keep playing along with her manipulative games anymore. I was done. Update 3. I never imagined she would go this far. I had always known that Hazel had made my life difficult, but I never thought she would stoop so low as to try and seduce my fiancé before my wedding. All the bullying, body shaming, and mocking me was one thing, but this was a whole new level. It was hard to accept that she was willing to jeopardize my wedding. As we were planning the details of our wedding, I was still not talking to Mom after the confrontation, but she called me to apologize. She explained that she had been scared of seeing Hazel have panic attacks, which caused her to lose control earlier. One of my cousins told me that Hazel had been crying about my happiness, spreading lies about how I was accusing her of trying to steal my fiancé and how I didn't deserve anything I had. I was getting the job, and according to Hazel, everything good in life, including Jaxon, should have gone to her since she considered herself the gorgeous one. She believed she deserved the best of everything. I mentioned this to Mom, and she went silent for a moment. Eventually, she told me to forget about all of it and just focus on my wedding and the life ahead. Everything seemed to go smoothly, and Hazel kept a low profile, at least not interfering until the wedding day. On the big day, as we were getting ready at the venue, I received a call from Jaxon's best friend, asking me to come to Jaxon's room with my parents. I joked about it, saying Jaxon couldn't see the bride before the wedding, but he told me it was something serious and needed to be addressed immediately. My heart raced, and I quickly headed to his room with my parents. When we arrived, Jaxon was lying shirtless, drifting in and out of consciousness, while his groomsmen explained what had happened. Jaxon had been getting ready when Hazel arrived with a drink. He refused to take it, but she insisted, getting him to have a sip. As soon as he did, he realized the drink had been spiked. He excused himself and went to the washroom. Once there, he called his friend and explained what had happened, asking him to come over. By the time his friend arrived, Jaxon was partially passed out and had left the washroom. His friend, who had the room key, came in to help. Jaxon's friend quickly turned on his camera as he snuck into the room. He overheard Jaxon shouting at Hazel to leave him alone while she was on top of him, trying to undress and making inappropriate moves. The entire disturbing scene was captured on camera. As soon as Hazel saw Jaxon's friend, she tried to cover up, pretending they were just making out. She quickly got up and left the room, unaware that everything had already been recorded. Before she left, she smirked at his friend and asked him not to tell anyone what had happened. When we arrived, Jaxon was still lying there, barely conscious. The drink had been so strong that it left him dizzy and with a pounding headache after just a sip. The glass was still there, with solid particles at the bottom. It was a deeply embarrassing moment for my parents. They couldn't believe Hazel could do something so terrible. My mom immediately called Hazel and told her to come to Jaxon's room. When Hazel showed up, her lipstick was smeared, and she tried to downplay the situation. She claimed, "I know you're upset, but it was mutual. Jaxon loves me, and he's been making advances on me ever since we met. Today, he convinced me to have a one-time hookup before the wedding." Mom slapped her hard, telling her they weren't buying the lies. Hazel tried to act as though nothing had happened, but she was completely taken off guard when she realized her actions had been recorded. She was shocked when my parents kicked her out of the venue before she could cause any more trouble. Security was instructed to prevent her from entering the premises again. It became clear she had hoped to stir up drama, hoping I would cancel the wedding after her attempt to make it appear as if she and Jaxon were involved. My dad immediately called a doctor who confirmed that Jaxon had been given a spiked drink, which left him disoriented. Jaxon's family was furious and wanted to take matters into their own hands, so my parents had to apologize to calm them down. The wedding was delayed until Jaxon fully recovered after several rounds of vomiting. The gossip spread quickly among the guests, and it was the talk of the town for the following days. When Jaxon finally recovered, my dad walked me down the aisle. I was excited to marry him, but also still shaken by everything that had transpired. Jaxon added an extra vow during our ceremony, promising to protect our relationship from anyone who tried to break us apart. After our honeymoon, my parents came to visit us to apologize to Jaxon for the trouble Hazel had caused. My dad assured us that Hazel would no longer be part of our lives, and he had even kicked her out of the house, telling her to fend for herself. Even now, I can't fully shake the memory of that day. My wedding almost didn't happen, and if Jaxon's friend hadn't recorded everything, I would never have believed that Jaxon wasn't involved in Hazel's malicious scheme.